speech because I'm still a little sleepy. I pray that you would wake all of us up, and may your will be done with us. Okay, so a couple days ago, I was just chilling in the apartment, and I had a sudden urge to just write a story, and I wanted to share that story with you guys. So it doesn't really have a title other than short story, and it's about two cops. So let's just dive in. Sergeant Rogers. Today I stepped into a fight that I didn't understand. It was a battle of the unseen. Lieutenant Daniels and I arrived at a suspicious activity in an abandoned building. It was in the middle of the night, around 3 a.m. It's probably just some stupid kids trespassing, I said with very little enthusiasm. Up past their mommy's bedtime, and up to no good. Just vandals. Daniel shook his head in agreement. Yeah, vandals. Daniels is a strange cop. Super religious, always has his Bible next to his pistol, constantly praying. It's super annoying. We were about a block away, and Daniels was parked next to the sidewalk, close to the bushes, and turned off the car, and then switched the lights off. We approached the hospital, but kept to the shadows to avoid being seen by any possible lookout. The hospital was dark, not a light to be seen in any of the windows. Daniels and I walked around the building to see if there were any signs of forced entry. Broken window, busted door, but nothing. So Daniels and I made our way back to the front of the hospital. We talked, but we kept our voices low to avoid detection. Strange, I whispered to Daniels. Dispatch said the caller saw shadowy figures enter through a busted window on the east side. Maybe 5 or 6 people. But there's no sign of forced entry on the east side. As if finishing my thought, Daniels said, the caller is probably just terrible with direction, and we missed something. I shook my head in agreement. Let's do a secondary sweep. We walked around the building again slowly, exercising more caution as to not miss any hidden details. We were rounding the corner of the west side of the building, and it seemed as if the night's mood changed. Everything got cold, as if the temperature dropped about 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And the stars and moon were still shining, but everything just seemed darker. As if it had appeared out of nowhere. As if it had appeared out of thin air, the window appeared. And it had a huge hole in it, as if somebody had run their own fist through it. And just above the break was something that made my stomach churn. It was blood. Thick, fresh blood. Since I was in front, I saw it first. Daniels, radio in for an EMT and backup, I said. And Daniels, after a couple of moments, sees the window and the blood, and his eyes get wide. But he doesn't hesitate. 607 to dispatch. We need... And then it trailed off because I stopped paying attention. And I begin to look inside the window. And there's a light down the hall. Suddenly, something stands in front of where the light is. It's tall, and it's certainly not human. Standing at a roughly 8 feet, it has to hunch over to avoid hitting its head on the ceiling. It strongly resembles a bat, but it stands as if it were a man. At first, it wasn't facing me, and then it turns its head towards me, and those eyes. They're so glossed over, completely white, but I could still make out its pupils barely. It was looking at me, and when it focused on me, I began to feel hopeless, sick even. And then it smiled at me, and took a step in towards the room and into the room, where the light was coming from. I stood there, shell-shocked, unable to move, talk, or barely even breathe. I felt as if I had sleep paralysis. I could hear Daniels frustrated behind me to reach dispatch for anybody, and he noticed me standing there, unmoving. Rogers, you okay? Daniels said, sounding concerned. He tapped my shoulders twice before stepping in front of me and looking me in the eyes. I must have looked awful because he got super serious very quickly. Rogers, he asked again, are you okay? I gazed up at him and shook my head. No. What did you see? Daniels said. I moved my mouth, but words weren't coming out. I was locked and gripped with fear. Daniels paused for a moment and took a deep breath. Can I pray for you? The initial confusion rocked me out of my state of fear. Pray for me? What good is that going to do? I thought people had prayed for me dozens of times before at church, and nothing ever happened then. But this time was different. There was compassion in Roger's voice, maybe even love. It was weird, but oddly comforting. I swallowed and collected myself barely enough to get out a raspy yes. I closed my eyes and bowed my head like I'd have done over and over again. Daniels nodded and rested his hands on my shoulder. His hand was strangely warm on this super cold night, and he began to pray a very simple prayer. Lord, I pray that Jacob's fear would be replaced with courage, and that he would feel your presence above all. Amen. I paused for a moment, took a breath, and said amen. And with that, and with my eyes still closed, I saw light, and a warmness that blanketed over me. I instantly felt no fear. I opened up my eyes and looked up at Daniels and gasped. He looked like Daniels, but there was something different. From the top of his head to the bottom of his feet, he was clad with this beautiful armor. The metal looked like brass that had just been pulled out of a furnace, and there were emblems, words, and insignias all over his armor. On his belt, the word truth blazed and shone brightly. On his chest, the word righteousness. On his feet, peace. On his left arm was a shield that had the word faith, and his helmet had the word salvation. And on top of that helmet, on his forehead, there was a cross. And strapped to his back was a sword with a blade that was engulfed in flame and glory. And written in small letters on the hilt was the phrase, Word of God. I stood there with my jaw slack, staring at the magnificence of what I'd just seen, that I almost didn't notice the figure behind him. He shone like the sun. His very presence was intense as a hurricane, but as relaxing as a summer's breeze. His eyes were every shade of color I could ever imagine. In one moment, they were a deep emerald green. The other, they were a fiery orange, and flames spewed out of them. They kept changing color every time I would blink. His hair was switching too, from a deep mahogany brown to white as snow. The color of his skin was a deep tan color, and he was just glorious. He looked like the Son of Man. He spoke to me, and his words washed over me like a river. Jackson, be at peace. And I was. He rested his right hand on my left shoulder and said, I will be with you always. Suddenly, a large shriek cut through the night air, followed by a large crashing noise from inside the hospital. The man looked at Daniels and nodded. Daniels drew his sword and held his shield out in front of him. The man said, Stay behind him and watch. Daniels ducked and crawled through the opening in the window. And I followed. As soon as we entered the building, the walls seemed to get closer to me, as if they desired to squeeze the life out of me, to squeeze the breath from my lungs. For a moment, panic began to grip me, but then the man's word rang in my ears. I will be with you always. And I felt better. I could no longer see him, but I knew he was very near. The flame from Daniel's sword was so bright that it acted like a torch to illuminate our path. Rogers, Daniel said, try reaching dispatch again. I nodded and said, good idea. I went for my radio, 608 to dispatch, and a voice finally came through. Go ahead, 608. I had never been so happy to hear that voice. And I said, send EMT and back up to 100 North Grand. Possible shots fired and visible blood marks on the exterior of the building. There was a crack in the dispatcher's voice. 10-4-608. Please be notified that this channel will be closed and only available to the people involved in this case effective immediately. You'll have direct communication with me, as well as any other necessary personnel whenever you need it. SWAT has been notified, and can you wait for backup? I looked at Daniels, and Daniels looked at me. And a split second later, we heard a woman screaming, followed by several screams and gunshots. 608 to dispatch. Shots fired. I repeat, shots fired. Daniels and I sprint down the hall, my pistol in my right hand and Daniel's sword drawn in his right. We ran down the hallway for what seemed like an eternity. With every stride we took, the screaming got louder and louder and louder, and the gunshots more intense. We lined up at the door's entrance and then crossed the threshold. Daniels went first, and I came in second. The scene was awful. There were 4 men and a woman standing in a U shape over a now bleeding body. There was a loud scream from behind the door on the far left side of the room. Daniels quickly turned and slammed his shield into the man. Once the man was on the ground, Daniels took his sword and stabbed the man twice, once in the right knee and then once in the left shoulder. Ouch. The 4 men in a U shape drew their pistols on Daniels. He immediately threw up his shield and braced for impact. I took one quick look at the assailants and noticed something was on them, and they weren't human. 4 of the men were surrounded by beings covered in thick, black goo. Some beings were short, with tails and wings, and others were tall and lanky with horns and needle-thin talons. They were screaming at the men to keep firing at the shield. Time slowed, and I saw the bullets travel through the air. Only they weren't bullets. They resembled flaming arrows. The bullets got closer, and I ducked behind Daniels. The bullet arrows made little to no impact on Daniel's shield. It didn't even push him back. He just stood there unmoved. The men shortly ran out of ammunition and quickly began to reload their weapons. Daniels sprung into action. He pulled back his right arm, which contained a sword, and flung it at the man closest to him. The blade sunk into his chest, and the man collapsed. Those demons were screaming in his ear, did not even check to see if he was okay. They simply just went to the next person and began to yell at him to kill Daniels and I. Before the others could finish reloading, their pistols, Daniels drew his pistol and fired only until the one woman and a man on the furthest side of the room stood. They had their pistols in hand, but they were pointed to the ground, and they had their fingers off the trigger. "Police!" Daniels roared. "Put your weapons down, or I'll put you down." The man and woman looked at one another and dropped their pistols on the ground, got on their knees, and raised their hands in the air. Daniels and I bolted at them and pressed their faces to the ground and began to detain and Mirandize them. Seconds later, the SWAT flooded into the room, screaming things like "police" and "hands in the air." They were surprised to see all the assailants on the ground, with either wounds or in cuffs. I stepped back and let SWAT handle the woman I had just put in cuffs. I looked up and noticed a window high up towards the ceiling. The demons were crawling out the window in obvious despair of defeat, and I saw it. The bat creature, staring at me in the eyes. It didn't seem happy at the demon's retreat, and it looked at me and flashed its teeth and disappeared into the night. Daniels casually walked over to take his sword out of the assailant's chest, and the assailant groaned when he pulled it out. I was surprised that none of the SWAT members even acknowledged the flaming armor, nor the sword that Daniels possessed. As if hearing my thoughts, Daniels walked over to me and whispered, "They can't see it the way that you and I do." I nodded, speechless at what I had just seen. The investigation went rather quickly, since the 2 in handcuffs turned out to really love talking. All of them were a part of a human trafficking ring, and the woman who was on the floor bleeding escaped their custody. They had been tracking this woman for days and caught up with her here at the hospital. The woman was shot 9 times in various parts of her body, including her arms, legs, and chest. She was found on the floor, curled up in her own blood with a Bible clutched to her chest. The assailants apparently opened fire once the woman refused to denounce Jesus Christ as her Lord and Savior. She was rushed to the nearest emergency room, where she refused to let go of her Bible, and the doctors had to pry it out of her hands so they could operate and extract the bullets. A nurse later found that a 10th bullet was lodged in her Bible and stopped over Psalms 23. And Psalms 23 is a psalm of David. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures, and he leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies, and you anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely love and goodness will follow all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. After the doctors worked tirelessly to stop the bleeding and finished extracting the bullets, they were finally able to stabilize her. In her stable state, investigators were able to ask her questions pertaining to the case. She identified all of the assailants, as well as several locations for human trafficking in the United States, as well as overseas. Her name was Monica, and she died later that morning from her wounds, with her Bible in her lap. She's now dancing in the halls of heaven with Jesus, as well as other brothers and sisters in Christ. There were no casualties that morning other than Monica. Daniels was able to immobilize all hyper-aggressive assailants without killing them, and they will serve time in prison for a very, very long time, and I will pray for them daily. As for me, I will continue to fight for the weak, but with a new perspective. I will fight the battle, seen or unseen, and I will work to grow closer to Jesus. My partner Daniels and I will fight until our hearts no longer beat, and we too will one day dance in the halls of heaven with Monica. What will you do? So, this entire story felt like it just got downloaded to me, because as soon as I put pen to paper, I couldn't stop writing. The goal here is to make a correlation between a fight in the natural and a fight in the spiritual, and those two coming together in this story. And I think what I'm going to do is actually put this story on Instagram or something. The link will be in the description if you want to read it again. But there's also a challenge at the end where Roger says, "What will you do?" Because he has just described that he will fight for the weak and do all of these other things. And it is a cool story, yes, but it's just that. It's just a story. But I also want it to be a challenge for you and anybody who's watching this video to keep fighting until your heart stops beating and you're finally in heaven. So, thank you for listening to my story. Hey everybody, thank you for watching this week's episode of SMC. If you want to see more videos like this, be sure to subscribe. If you want to learn more about Fulfilled, go ahead and check out our social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook. Also, we have a website. And on there is the address to pretty much this place. And we have a 24/7 prayer room if you'd like to come check it out. You can literally check it out at any time of day or night. Thank you for watching this video again, and I hope you'll have a wonderful day. See you later.